Thank you for joining me here at 420 Colts Lane. I am your host, Nathan Lowry. Today I'm going to be discussing my predictions for the AFC West. This was a very interesting division to dive into. I believe that there is a lot of question marks in this division. I'll be getting into that and discussing that further. As of now, I am ready to discuss some football. The fourth place team I have here is going to be the Raiders. They finished last year 4-12. They had 3,751 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Not fantastic, although the interceptions are low. They had 3,853 yards allowed. That's 36 touchdowns allowed with 14 interceptions taken away. Also not good. They lost all of those battles, except for they did have more interceptions than they gave up, and that's good. So they do have some saving grace. 1,628 rushing yards with 9 touchdowns, not great. 2,249 yards allowed with 16. They obviously struggled against the rush. That's a large number there. 2,249 yards allowed. This is by far the worst statistic that they have, as if any of those other ones aren't worse. 13 sacks is all they got. That's it. I'm pretty sure that's the lowest number of all the teams I've looked into so far, and I'm sure that nobody's going to be lower. If there is another team lower, that's really sad. 13 sacks is not very good at all. 52 allowed. There couldn't be a statistic more opposite of each other. This was a horrible, horrible part of their team, and definitely needed to be addressed in the off season. Let's see how they did. The draft, 4th overall, they got Clelin Ferrell, defensive end out of Clemson. A lot of people said that this was a stretch. I do believe it was a bit of a stretch. They could have traded back. They could have gotten some draft picks and got him later on in the draft. I think that there were some other players they maybe could have picked up that would have been good for their team as well here at this position. But as far as the pick overall, it does seem like that's who they wanted. Mike Mayock is the new GM over there, and obviously John Gruden was the new head coach last year. I do like Gruden. It seems a little interesting what the Raiders have been doing, and everybody kind of really criticized Gruden for the way he went about the team last year. Obviously, they weren't that great. Obviously, they were kind of a joke. 4-12, and I just read you the statistics here. But I think what he wanted to do was break down the team and rebuild on his own. Going and getting Mike Mayock was interesting. You either love him or you hate him. It seems like a lot of people are really down on that. I actually like Mike Mayock. I've always kind of liked his perspective and following the draft. That's where I know him mostly from, his draft coverage. He seems like a pretty bright guy to me, although other people would disagree with that. That's fine. But I believe that they really liked this Clelin Ferrell, and that was their guy. And much like other teams did, they jumped ahead to get the guy that they wanted. When it comes to the Colts, we celebrate that stuff. Everybody, thinks that our GM Ballard does a great job picking guys. I think that they just saw who they wanted and they went for it. They didn't want to trade back. They didn't want to wait. They got their guy. Again, a lot of people think it was a stretch. But when I read you the sack totals, 13 sacks, they got to do something to address this issue. And I think going out and getting Clelin Ferrell, who actually does seem like a pretty high character guy too as well, somebody that they can set on the defense for years that's going to be a leader. I find it hard to hate the pick. Again, could have traded back. Maybe they picked a little high, but I think it was a good pick. He's out of Clemson, if I didn't mention that. Then 24th overall, they got Josh Jacobs, running back out of Alabama. Again, some people say that they jumped a little high. I think Josh Jacobs, from what I understand, is a pretty good back. He's a big back, and I like those backs. Obviously, they had Marshawn Lynch. I think that he's still on the team. I think that if I remember correctly, he hasn't retired yet, but a lot of people think he has. Maybe he has, and I missed that. There was a lot to research for this team, so if I miss anything, I do apologize. There was so much going on with them this offseason. But Josh Jacobs, yeah, I do think that this is a good pick. And yeah, maybe they could have got him a little bit later, traded back a little bit, but here at 24, I think for a very solid running back, that's a great place to get this. So I like this pick. Number 27, just 3 picks later, Jonathan Abrams, safety from Mississippi State. Love it. I love this pick. I really wanted him to come to the Colts. He's a hard-hitting safety. He's my kind of safety. I really like that out of safeties. I don't think necessarily he fit with the Colts were doing. He's got a bit of a edgy personality. He talks a lot of trash, I guess. Apparently, he's got that chip on his shoulder. He's kind of a mean guy a little bit. So I do think that that's not necessarily the fit for the Indianapolis Colts, even though I really wanted him because I like his gameplay and I really like that at that position. I think he fits perfect here for the Raiders. Obviously, the Raiders have been historically a little bit of a rough team. Their city's a little bit rough. So I do think he kind of fits in, and I think this is a fantastic pick. The Raiders are going to love this pick, in my opinion, for years to come. They couldn't have done better here at 27. So, number 40 overall, Trayvon Mullen. He is a cornerback out of Clemson. They must love themselves some Clemson players. They took quite a bit here. Cornerback from Clemson. They obviously need help at cornerback. They really just needed help on defense, period. And it seems like so far they've definitely addressed that. We've got Max Crosby. He's a defensive end out of Eastern Michigan. Don't know a whole lot from Eastern Michigan. Can't comment too much on it. Isaiah Johnson, cornerback from Houston. I guess he's a bit of a versatile cornerback. That's what they were saying. So, again, they need help on defense. Their defense was atrocious. They traded away Khalil Mack the year before, who obviously came into the Bears, did a great job. He was a great player. I don't know that he was playing at the highest level. I mean, obviously he was playing at a high level. He's a high-level player. But I don't know playing for the Raiders before that he was playing as high as level as he was for the Bears. And it's probably because there wasn't much around him. Sometimes with players, that'll wear on you. And even if you're good, you kind of get a little, you know what I mean? It's hard to get motivated when you're around people that aren't pulling their own weight. And around a team where everything's asked of you, you can be double-teamed. You can be blocked very easily. I think he fits in much with the Bears. So, obviously, like I said, they needed to address this defense that did not play up to par at all last year. Kind of a joke. And it does seem like that's what they're doing here. Okay. Foster Morio. Don't know how to pronounce that name. He's a tight end out of LSU. Don't know much about him. Hunter Renfrow at 149. Hunter Renfrow, wide receiver out of Clemson, another Clemson player. I guess he's a little bit of a slot receiver, which when you couple with what else they did at wide receiver in the offseason, this is probably a very, very good solid pick here. At 149, he's probably not the greatest player anyways, but they need to add something. Again, they only had 19 touchdowns last year passing. They have a good quarterback, so to only have 19 shows that they had a weak wide receiving core. Quentin Bell, defensive end from Prairie View A&M. Never heard of that place, Prairie View A&M. I guess he's a project piece, and at 230 overall, pretty much everybody's a project piece, but I guess he was a wide receiver. And he ended up, he was a large wide receiver. He ended up converting over, I want to say he's 6'2", 230 or something like that. He probably put on a little weight after he got away from the wide receiver position, probably an oversized wide receiver. But obviously he's got speed, he's got athleticism. So this could end up being a good pick overall. Probably doesn't have a lot of coaching coming from Prairie View A&M. But who knows? There are examples of people like this that come into the league and end up becoming good players once they're coached up. They just have natural athletic ability. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that pick. But at 230, you're not going to expect much anyways. Now we get to the free agency, and I got to say, I haven't finished all of the divisions, but as of so far, This has been the busiest team in the free agency. It was ridiculous researching these people. It actually wore me out. Thanks, Raiders, for wearing me out. All right, we've got Trenton Brown, right tackle from New England. I like that pick. They have a decent offensive line anyways, so really anybody that you're getting from them I think is going to be decent. They got a lot of good depth. They do a good job getting players anyhow, so a lot of times when New England players leave New England they don't play up to par, but at an offensive line I'm sure that this is a good player here. Tyrell Williams, he's a wide receiver out of the Chargers. Again, they needed to address wide receiver. They addressed a little bit in the draft, but they need some experience, so they went out and got this guy. I don't think that Tyrell Williams is a outstanding player, but obviously he's going to add something to the team because they need something at that position. LaMarcus Joyner, free safety from the Rams. I like this pickup. I think Joyner is a solid free safety. Again, their defense was horrible, so most people that they're going to add here probably do bring something that they are missing. They were missing a lot. All right, we've got Nevin Lawson, or that could be my poor spelling, and it's actually Kevin Lawson. He's a cornerback from Detroit. Again, addressing cornerback, bringing in some experience here as well. Vontae Burfict, outside linebacker from Cincinnati. Burfict was a guy that I followed when I lived in Arizona. He played for Arizona State. He is also a very, very mean guy. This guy will hit you hard. He's been penalized a lot. I don't think that he's ever played up to exactly the skill level he did at college, or people expected him to play coming out of college. Again, he does get penalized a lot. He's got a big attitude problem, and I think he fits with the Raiders. I think this is a good pickup for the Raiders, and chances are he's going to come in and play, I think, harder than he did. He came from Cincinnati, which is also another team that has a history with these kind of players with attitude problems. But I do think he's going to fit in with the Raiders. It'll be interesting to see, what they do with him and if he improves his game. He's a little bit older now, so I'm not sure how much he's going to improve, if he's reached his ceiling or not. Maybe they'll get that play out of him that nobody else has been able to. We'll have to see how that goes. But overall, I do think that that's a good pickup here, especially for the defense that they've had. Mike Glennon, quarterback from Arizona. This is backup material. Obviously, they've got Derek Carr. He's not going to compete for the starting position at all. Good. Bring Glennon in to compete there for the backup. So Benson Mayowa, defensive end from Arizona. I don't know a whole bunch about him, unfortunately. Josh Moreau, defensive tackle from the Giants. Don't know much about him either. Brandon Marshall, inside linebacker from Denver. Not the greatest player in the world, but a solid player, and I actually like this pickup as well. Coming over from inside linebacker. They've completely retooled this team. I mean, I'll get into this even further. This goes a long way. I actually had to use 2 pages for free agency. I've never done that before. So they really retooled their whole team. And it needed it, and it definitely shows. So this is where I start talking about question marks. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this team. It's kind of hard to gauge because it's not going to be pretty much at all the same team that it was last year. They've added a whole bunch of pieces, and in the last 2 years have gotten rid of a whole bunch of pieces. So we have Doug Martin, which is a re-sign. He was a running back. I think that he, in his first couple years, Tampa, I'm pretty sure, is who he played for. He was a solid running back, but it doesn't seem like he's still playing at that higher level. They had Marshawn Lynch, and I think between the two of them, they had 16-28, which isn't, it's mediocre running, only 9 touchdowns. So I do think that they need to improve in that running game, but they did re-sign Doug Martin. Ryan Grant, wide receiver out of Indy. He's a wide receiver. I don't think we saw too much of him. I don't think we used much of him, but with our wide receiving core, the way it wasn't the greatest anyways. We do have some issues there. So Ryan Grant's not the greatest, but he's going to be used as depth here. They needed help there. So Isaiah Crowell, He's a running back out of the Jets. Again, I think that they're trying to address that running back. I do like this. I think that he's a decent running back. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. J.J. Nelson, wide receiver out of Arizona. Again, adding wide receivers. Jordan Richards, strong safety out of Atlanta. Luke Wilson, tight end out of Detroit. They're adding all kinds of depth. Again, they are completely retooling this team with Mike Mayock. He's probably got his idea of the players that he likes. I know Gruden does, and they're probably just going out and adding players that fit what they're looking for and trying to find out what works and what doesn't. I can't imagine. I mean, they had a whole lot of stuff in free agency, so there's going to be people cut, no doubt about it. Not everybody is going to make this team, but it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. Jordan Devey, guard out of Kansas City. Curtis Riley, free safety out of New York Giants. Landry Jones, quarterback out of Jacksonville. Again, another quarterback that they brought in to compete for the backup position. Because I do think Derek Carr has had some injury issues. So, I don't think Landry Jones is not that bad as a backup. So it'll be interesting to see who wins that backup position. All right, Chaz Green, tight end. This is a re-sign. Eric Swoop, also a tight end from, Chaz Green is a tackle. I call him tight end. Tackle. Eric Swoop is a tight end from Indy. He wasn't going to compete with our tight ends. Very low on our depth chart. I think he was our fourth tight end, if I remember correctly. But sure, I mean, they need to add something here. They need to add targets to be passed to. So they're just seeing what they can do. Alex Barrett, defensive end out of Detroit. Again, addressing a lot of that depth here. Also, they bring in Richie Incognito, who's with the Bills, is a guard. I actually didn't know he still played football. I actually thought that he was suspended and kicked out of football. I'm a little surprised that he does play football. This guy has got a huge attitude problem. He's a little bit of a psycho, but the fact that I didn't know that he still played means that at least he hasn't done anything to get him in the news recently. He kind of flew incognito through the league last year. Nobody really recognized, like I said, I had no idea he was still playing. I did not know he played for the Bills. He got in trouble a few years back in the Dolphins for some terrible stuff, calling people racist names. So, Richie Incognito. Then they also traded for Antonio Brown. Obviously, that was the big news here. Obviously, this is a all-star player, but he does have some attitude problems. If you go back and you watch me talk about the Steelers in a previous video, I really do. I cannot stand Big Ben. I really can't. I think he's one of the worst players. Not worst. He is one of the most unlikable people in the NFL. So I kind of understand a little bit with Antonio Brown not getting along with them. At the same time, Antonio Brown has become a drama queen. He is very dramatic. He is very much a diva. Very good wide receiver. Obviously, he's probably the best wide receiver in the league, if not arguably the best wide receiver in the league. There's some people you could put up there. But I do think Antonio Brown brings something to Oakland that they sorely were missing. There's no way that they only have 19 touchdowns. Not with Derek Carr throwing the ball. If he's to get injured, who's to say what? But with Derek Carr, I think that this could be a very good tandem, him throwing to Antonio Brown. Now, the biggest problem I have here, we'll continue. Key losses. Jared Cook, tight end to New Orleans. I do like Jared Cook. I think he's a good tight end, and I think he was their best. Really their most recognizable passing threat. So I like Jared Cook, but they can replace him eventually. So we'll have to see how that all works out. But Lee Smith, also tight end, Buffalo. So they lost 2 tight ends. A.J. McCarron, their backup quarterback. He went to Houston. That's it. That's all they lost was 3 players, really. I think there was a couple other players that low, but key losses, that's all they lost. With that said, last year they lost so many players and they got rid of so many people. Gruden came in and just started hacking away at people, and there was a lot of talk about how ridiculous it was that they lost them. I think he's just retooling for the future, and looking at what they did, there's a possibility that they have improved quite a bit. I can't imagine them having the same record. I think that they're going to improve their record. Here at 4 wins is it. Very, very low amount of wins. I do think that they improve this. They're not going to improve it drastically, in my opinion. They play in a very tough division. So we'll just have to see how it all plays out. This is where the question marks come in. My biggest question marks is how well do all of the players gel together? You have brought in a whole lot of egos. You have brought in a whole lot of drama. Again, Richie Incognito is somebody that he's a jerk, big time jerk, well recognized jerk. Antonio Brown, jerk, recognized jerk. Perfect, jerk, recognized jerk. So they are bringing in Abrams. They got Abrams. He's a bit of a trash talker, a hothead. This is either going to work really well for them, or it's going to blow up in their face, and it is going to be a terrible, terrible locker. I believe that they got the bid for Hard Knocks, and that is going to be interesting to watch. It's good for their brand regardless, but it's going to be interesting with all of these attitudes. How do they come together? Obviously, what Mike Mayock and Gruden wanted to do was bring that edginess to their team again. They wanted to bring some tough people into Oakland. I do think that's the right move as far as fitting what it is that Oakland is. Do you know what I mean? I talk a lot about, the Browns bringing in the chip on his shoulder quarterback, Baker Mayfield. He fit perfectly with their team. I think he's good for what they do. I think a lot of these players they brought in fit perfectly with the Raiders. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Can't wait to see it. All right, on to the third place. I am actually going to go with the Broncos here. Now, my problem is I actually think the Broncos could be in the second place, but we'll have to see. I do think that they're closer to the second place team than people will give them credit for, but we'll have to see how that plays out. I can't put them in the second place yet. Question mark, question mark, question mark. I am going to go, okay, here's what they are. 6-10-0. They were 3,695 passing yards. They had 19 touchdowns only and 15 interceptions. They haven't had great quarterback play. They gave up 3,929 yards passing with 17 touchdowns taken away, which is good, and then 26 touchdowns given up. That's not horrible, really, 26. It's just that they couldn't get enough quarterback play out of theirs to get more than 19, and I think that is where their biggest issue was. They had 1,907 rushing yards. That's pretty darn solid. 18 rushing touchdowns. So obviously their rushing game is good. Allowed 1,913. So they actually allowed, even though that was a good rushing game, they allowed a little bit more yardage. Only 11 touchdowns. All in all, their defense and their offense kind of evened each other out, it seems. There wasn't a huge separation between how much they gave up and how much they got. I think that the biggest difference is going to be quarterback play here. They did have 44 sacks, and they allowed 34. So they won that battle. Good for them. So I think overall, I just want to express with these statistics that they haven't had good quarterback play. So with a decent quarterback, they can improve. We'll talk about that a little more. Here's what they did in the draft. They didn't have a whole lot of selections. They went with number 20th overall, Noah Fant, tight end out of Iowa, who is a catching tight end, and I think that he is going to be a good pickup here. It's a great target to have. I think long-term, Noah Fant is going to be a great tight end. Dalton Reisner, he's a guard / center out of Kansas State, so they're just dressing that line. Drew Lock, quarterback at 42, Drew Lock is, I guess, their guy. They wanted him regardless. This was the quarterback that most people thought that he was going to go a little higher to them. And I want to say kudos to the Broncos and Elway for not reaching too far and grabbing this guy. I guess that they did jump up to 42 from 52, I believe. I could be wrong about that number, but it does seem like they traded a few later round picks to kind of jump up, which is why I don't think that they had too many draft picks here. But they wanted to jump up and grab this guy because he was still available here at 42, and I don't think that's terrible. I think Locke is probably a decent enough quarterback that at 42 this justifies this pick. It'll be interesting to see going forward. I don't think that they've done a good job, especially Elway, at evaluating quarterbacks. They've missed quite a bit. But if Locke is who they want, I like Locke. I like watching him play. I don't think he's the best quarterback. He obviously wasn't the best quarterback in the draft. But he's definitely got potential, and it'll be interesting to see what happens here. He's going to be a future quarterback anyways. So we'll see how that plays out. Question mark. Dramont Jones, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. Justin Hollins, man, I got to do a better job writing these things. Linebacker, oh, jeez. Yes, Justin Hollins. Linebacker out of Oregon. He's okay. I mean, this is at 156. He's not going to blow your socks off, but at 156, I mean, I'm sure this is a good pick here, 156, I think. Juwan Winfrey, wide receiver out of Colorado. I guess he's a little bit of a bigger wide receiver. I think 210 was his size, like 6'2", 210 or something like that. So he's a little bit of a bigger wide receiver. But he's a project wide receiver, is what they're saying. But again, these lower picks in the draft are never going to be coming out the gate, at least that you can recognize as being these good picks. So obviously that's going to be for the future. They were fairly busy here in free agency. They obviously traded for Joe Flacco. The interesting thing about Joe Flacco is, again, question mark. This guy was a good quarterback at one point in time. I don't think he was ever a great quarterback, and I actually have always thought that he was a little overhyped. I think him and Matt Ryan, when they came into the league together, Matt Ryan, I always felt, was a little bit of a better quarterback than Joe Flacco. Not a little bit, but I think much better quarterback than Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco came into a team that had a good running game and a good defense, and I think that his success depended on that. Good running game, solid defense. I do think that he comes into another team with a solid defense and a good running back. I think that the biggest problem that this team had is consistency at quarterback. They haven't been able to put it together. It doesn't seem like a whole lot has changed as far as I still think that they have a solid defense and they have a good running game. So you add him, maybe he gets a little energized by coming onto this team. My biggest problem with Flacco is kind of a lot like Cutler a little bit. He doesn't have much emotion. He seems to be, they call him what I think it's Joe Cool. Joe Cool. He's kind of cool. He never really, never gets hyped up, never loses his temper. He's just kind of straight. His emotions just play. Personally, myself, I look at the guy and I see a guy who seems stoned to me all the time. He does. So maybe he's a good fit there in Denver, who obviously celebrates the marijuana. And he hung out with, and he was good friends with Michael Phelps, who's been in trouble for smoking the marijuana. So, who knows? Maybe he'll get energized there in Denver and feel great because of all the edibles that he has before the games. We'll have to watch them, see how that plays. But, question mark. Again, we'll see. If he gets back to form where he can play as a really solid quarterback, again, not a great quarterback, but at least a solid quarterback, I think that this team could be much improved. I think that one position could improve them. At the same time, if he doesn't play better, if he plays the same as he played later on here in Baltimore in his last few years, I'm not sure that he has improved them that much. And then we will see them pretty much in the same kind of a position that they're in. 6-7 wins. Question mark. Free agency. Juwan James, right tackle out of Miami. Kareem Jackson, cornerback out of Houston. Bryce Callahan, cornerback out of Chicago. Jeff Heverman, tight end, is a re-sign. Zach Kerr, defensive tackle, re-sign. Jake Brindle, center, out of Miami. Deshaun Williams, defensive tackle, out of Indy. These all seem like just depth chart pickups. Doesn't seem like they were trying to retool anything or address any big needs. I don't think that they necessarily had to address any big needs, with the exception of quarterback. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. Again, Noah Fant is a great pickup at tight end. I think that's going to be, to me, it seems like a bit of a mediocre draft and free agency, but I'm not quite sure that they needed to have outstanding. They just need to add a couple depth chart picks here or there. I personally feel like this team will be better than they were last year. Key losses: Matt Paradis, center to Carolina. I do think that hurts a little bit. Billy Turner, guard, Green Bay. It'll be interesting to see how their line play is next year, if any of these losses affect that. Bradley Roby, cornerback. He went to Houston. Shaquille Barrett, outside linebacker, to Tampa Bay. Jared Veldheer, right tackle, to New England. Matt Lacoste, tight end, to New England. Stop giving players to New England's team. Max Garcia, cornerback, out of to Arizona. Brandon Marshall, inside linebacker, to Oakland. I do think they'll feel a little bit of these losses. None of these are stud players. None of these are, several of these players were. I think Paradis was a pretty good center, if I remember correctly. But anyways, we'll see if the losses and the additions even out or not. Question marks. All kinds of question marks here. All kinds of question marks. Did I get into my second page? Yes, I did. Okay. So that's how I got at third. Again, it'll be interesting to see. I think this all depends on Flacco with the Broncos, but I am of the impression that this team is going to be a little bit improved and closer to the second place team than people will talk about or have talked about outside of Bronco fans. Who I will give a lot of credit to the Broncos fans, because they do recognize this. A lot of them don't seem to be freaking out about where they were last year. A lot of them look at it and they go, we're a quarterback away from putting a team together and being able to compete. Again, is Flacco the answer or not? This is the biggest question mark. But I think fans of the Broncos understand, and rightfully so, that this team is not horrible. It's really not. And I think that they're a better team than the 6-10 record shows. We'll have to see how that goes. Second place in this division, I have the Chiefs. They went 12-4 last year. This team gave up 4,955 passing yards, which is outstanding, 12 interceptions, and 50 touchdowns. We'll get into talking about that. They allowed 4,374, 15 interceptions with 30 touchdowns. They definitely probably need to jump up the interception a little bit, but 30 touchdowns isn't awful. It's definitely not horrible, especially when you're able to throw for 50 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Like I said, we'll get into that. Rushing, 1,855 yards with 16 touchdowns, which is very solid. They had a very, very good offense last year. Amazing to watch. They did, however, allow 2,114 rushing yards allowed and 19 touchdowns. Not good. Not good. And you can tell where the issue is on this team, even though they went 12-4, so there wasn't a whole lot of issues last year. This is all right. 52 sacks is what they got. I was actually surprised by that. I didn't actually realize that they put that much pressure. Really, it was their run game that was run defense that was the biggest problem. 26 sacks allowed. That's really not awful, for sure. That's definitely not. Not even close. That's pretty good, actually. So they maintained when I talk about of course I'm talking about Patrick Mahomes, who 50 yards, 4,955 passing yards, or 50 touchdowns, 4,955 passing yards, and 12 interceptions. He played out of his freaking mind last year. This is a great quarterback. When you see guys come into the league, sometimes this was the first year we really got to see him play. He wasn't a rookie, but it was the second year. But it was the first year that he actually got to play. A lot of times what you want is more film. You want to see more years. You want to have more to look at than just 1 year of play before you make your decision on whether they're a great quarterback or not. I think in Patrick Mahomes and the way that he played, he's a great quarterback. I am 100% sold on Patrick Mahomes. I think Kansas City going forward are going to be an extremely dangerous team with this kid on their team. And as long as he's healthy and as long as he's playing, I think that they have solid competition forever. With that said, let's get into our off season here. Chiefs draft. We've got McCall Hardman. He's a wide receiver out of Georgia at number 56 overall. So they had to go to 56 before they had a pick. I actually really like this wide receiver. I didn't know a whole lot about him until we started doing the research for the Colts and looking at wide receivers for the Colts. My buddy that got on there with me kind of schooled me up a little bit with McCall Hardman, and I do think he's a good wide receiver. He's a bit of a burner. I think a 4.33 is what he ran. So I'm looking forward to see how he matches up with Patrick Mahomes throwing to him, who I think can just place the ball anywhere he wants. He can make any throw that he wants, almost better than anybody I've ever seen. It's really amazing. So that is obviously a good pickup. Even if he was a lesser speed wide receiver, I would say any wide receiver they pick up is going to be good with this guy, it seems like. Juan Thornhill. He's a safety out of Virginia at 63 overall. Obviously adding a safety to their team there. Their defense definitely needs some help. Kalen Sanders, defensive tackle out of Western Illinois. Don't know a whole bunch about him. He was 84th overall, but I guess he's big at 324. They need to address this run defense. That's what this pickup was all about. 201, Roslyn Fenton. He's a cornerback out of South Carolina. 214, Darwin Thompson. With Rashad Fenton, I have notes here that he was, I think that he was the safety. I think that they were talking about playing him as safety. I could be wrong about that. But all right, 214, we've got Darwin Thompson. He's a running back out of Utah State. He could be a change of pace back. They got two bigger backs. He's a little bit smaller, but he's still like 5'8", 200 pounds. So when I say he's a little bit smaller, he's still a ripped guy. He's stacked. So 200 is pretty good size for a 5'8" running back. He's a little bit different than the other ones that they have on the team who are bigger backs, but he could definitely be a change of pace. He's going to be a rotation. At 214, you don't expect huge things anyways, but we'll see how that plays out. Nick Alleghetti, he's a center from Illinois at 216. It's a depth chart pick. In free agency, they got Tyrann Matthews out of Houston, free safety. That's the Honey Badger out of LSU, who got in a little bit of trouble for, his character was brought into question because he really liked to smoke the weed back in LSU. I think he's a great player. I think Tyrann Matthews is a great player, and I'm glad to see him leave Houston. I wish he would have went to an NFC team instead of an AFC team, who I think we're going to be competing against in the future if he stays on that team. I do like Tyrann Matthew. I think he's a good free safety. He's got good skill sets. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but that was a good pickup for them, in my opinion. Alex Okafor, defensive end out of New Orleans. I think that that's a pretty good pickup. Damian Wilson, outside linebacker from Dallas. Carlos Hyde, running back from Jacksonville, depth chart pick. Carlos Hyde was a fairly decent running back for a while. It doesn't seem like I didn't even know he was on Jacksonville, and we played Jacksonville twice a year. So he's obviously not making too big of a splash, but we'll have to see how that he adds in there, especially with the one that they drafted and some of the players that they currently have. Bashad Braylon, cornerback out of Green Bay. Jeremiah Eticha, outside linebacker from the Jets. They need to address these defensive players because of what's coming up. All right, Blake Bell, tight end out of Jacksonville. And now we get into their key losses. And right here is where I think the Chiefs take a step back. We'll get into this. Mitch Morse, center out of Buffalo. Steven Nelson, cornerback to Pittsburgh. Justin Houston, linebacker to the Indianapolis Colts. Demetrius Harris, tight end to Cleveland. Chris Conley, wide receiver to Jacksonville. Spencer Ware, running back to Indy. Kareem Hunt, running back to Cleveland. Eric Berry, who I don't think has been signed from anybody, but they didn't re-sign him. He obviously is old in the tooth. There's no doubt about it. But he was a good player, a very good player for a long time. I think he played a little with reckless abandonment and has suffered some major injuries. So his play is probably down. But just his leadership alone and his experience and his veteran presence, I think, will be missed a little bit. Tyreek Hill. He is still on the team, but I think that he is facing suspension. He was cleared from last thing I read for the child abuse issue, but not necessarily cleared from suspension, I guess. I was in a hurry trying to finish this up, so I didn't read all of the details, but he could still face some suspension, so not necessarily that they lost him, but they could lose him for some games. And Tyreek Hill is a great player. D. Ford, linebacker, went to San Francisco. Eric Murray, safety, went to Cleveland. They struggled a little bit in the run game, defense-wise. Their passing game, defensive-wise, wasn't terrible at all. 52 sacks. Like I said, they got some pressure on people. They played very well. But there's a lot of losses here on offense and defense, and I just can't see that not affecting their team. Justin Houston, Chris Conley at wide receiver, Spencer Ware, Kareem Hunt. Obviously, Kareem Hunt played a role there until he got suspended, and then obviously they completely kicked him off the team, which he went and signed at Cleveland. I don't like the way that these things work out. It seems a little like teams just kind of want to get ahead of the PR. I just wish this stuff didn't happen until they see what happens. You know what I mean? Like, stick behind the guy, or I don't know. Now all of a sudden he's in Cleveland, which helps Cleveland out. It seems kind of unnecessary to me, where he could have stayed with the Chiefs, but they wanted to distance themselves because of PR. I don't like any of that stuff. I don't. Obviously, I don't like what happened with Kareem Hunt. I think he's still serving 4-game suspension. But at the same time, it just seems like some of these teams are so quick to just let people go and just distance themselves from them, and it affects them in the long run. And with Tyreek Hill, I hope that he comes back. I would really like to see him not be suspended at all. But if he is, it does affect him. D. Ford, it affects him. Even like I said, Eric Berry, he might not be playing at the highest level, but he's still a veteran player. So I just feel like this team lost more than they gained, in my opinion. They obviously have Patrick Mahomes. He's a great quarterback, and in the future years, this guy is going to be such a threat to everybody. I very much fear him. I do. I say that, like, I was looking forward to Tom Brady retiring, and now all of a sudden you have this like influx of good young quarterbacks to give us competition in the AFC, which I like. I do like the competition. Patrick Mahomes scares me, and I think that the Chiefs eventually are going to be people who the Colts have to look at as 100% threats all of the time. Question marks. Is Patrick Mahomes going to be enough to overcome some of the deficiencies in the team? He obviously did overcome some of the deficiencies in the team last year, though the defense was better than people were giving them credit for. I do think that in the long run, being a Colts fan and going through the Peyton Manning era, Peyton Manning made up for a whole plethora of holes on our team. We still only won one Super Bowl. We should have won a lot more. We didn't, because we didn't have a good team around him. And I'm just concerned that with the Chiefs, they are going to suffer that same fate. You got to build a team. You do. You have to have other players besides your quarterback. And I think, though they did try to, like I said, Tyrann Mathieu, they tried to add some people, I don't think they have a 12-4 record this year. And like I was saying with the Broncos, I think the Broncos narrowed the gap, because I do believe that they took a step forward while the Chiefs took a step back. We'll have to see how much of a step back and how much of a step forward each team took, respectively. It'll be interesting to see. Question marks. I don't know. Like I said, I believe in Patrick Mahomes, and he is one of those players where I do believe could have the capability, like Peyton Manning, of overcoming some of those deficiencies. Very few players, in my opinion, do that. He does. So, with that said, we're going to be going on to number one. Number one in this division, the Chargers. They went 12-4 last year. Again, this is a tough division with just those two teams. If the Broncos improve and the Raiders improve, This is going to be a very strong division. But the Chargers, 12-4, they had 4,089 passing yards, 32 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Very solid play out of Phillip Rivers. 3,646 yards allowed passing, which is, it's good. They were able to keep them under 4,000 and go over 4,000 themselves, so that's good. 13 interceptions, 23 touchdowns allowed. So, really, they did stop people from scoring on them. And I wonder how many of those touchdowns were from Patrick Mahomes. Anyways, 1,873 rushing yards with 16 touchdowns, very solid. They gave up 1,693 with 11 touchdowns. The yardage is mediocre. Touchdowns at 11 is not bad at all. You've got 38 sacks with 34 allowed, so that kind of evened each other out a little bit. I'm sure that they could address some of that. All right. In the draft, they went with 28 overall, Jerry Tillery, defensive tackle out of Notre Dame. I actually really like this pick. I looked at Jerry Tillery for us. There were some question marks about his character, and not just about his character, but how much focus he has on the game, because he has a lot of outside influences and things that he likes to do. He's a bit of a character, like not a good character, but like this larger than life kind of guy who really, really is fun to be around, I guess, and he's got his own interests in mind. With that said, I think Jerry Tillery is a great pickup here, especially for the team like the Chargers. A defensive tackle, he's good. Cornerback, Nasir Adderley out of Delaware. That was 60th overall. This is the guy. I'm sorry, earlier when I talked about that in Denver, I believe, this is the guy that they said is going to be a safety. So it's for the Chargers. I messed that up. That he's going to be probably a safety instead of a cornerback, just so you're aware of that. Trey Pipkins, outside tackle or offensive tackle out of South Falls. Okay. Trey, that was 91 overall. 130 overall. Drew Tranquil, inside linebacker for Notre Dame. Again, he's an okay player. He's athletic. I guess he's a little bit of a smaller guy, but he's athletic. This is probably a guy who will come in on third downs for coverage, that kind of thing. Maybe special teams is what they were trying to talk about him. He's not a starter, in my opinion, at least not yet, not at this level. So. Easton Stick, he's a quarterback out of North Dakota, obviously competing for backup stuff. Amik Ekwell, defensive end out of Houston. 242, Cortez Broughton, defensive tackle out of Cincinnati. It's a mediocre draft. Again, I really like Jerry Tillery. There wasn't huge things in this, but I don't think the Chargers need a whole lot. Free agency. They've got Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. Again, coming in. He came from Cleveland, coming in to compete for this backup position, which I think Tyrod Taylor is good enough to be a starter on some teams. So as a backup, I don't think this is bad at all. Brandon Mebane, defensive tackle, is a re-sign. Thomas Davis, outside linebacker, Carolina. They didn't do a whole lot in free agency at all. Their key losses: Tyrell Williams, wide receiver to Oakland; Darius Philbin, defensive tackle to Arizona; Jason Verrett, cornerback to San Francisco. Again, not a whole lot going on in the offseason for the Chargers. The Chargers don't need a whole lot. They really don't. This is a very, very solid team, and it is one of only two teams in the AFC I think are better than the Colts. So they didn't need to do much. With the other teams, there's all kinds of question marks. There is. There is all kinds of what's going to happen. This team, I think, stayed exactly where they're at. They are the top team in this division, and one of the top teams in the league, period. They have great depth. It's not even about just their quarterback play, who I think is very underrated. I think Phillip Rivers has always been one of these guys that kind of flies under the radar, even though he is a very, very solid quarterback. A great quarterback, to be honest with you. I shouldn't even call him solid. I should call him a great quarterback. He's very consistent in his play. The biggest question mark on the team, I think, is how long can he keep doing this? He is getting up there with age. I'm not quite sure what his age is, but he's getting close to 40, I do believe. Maybe even right at 40, regardless. With these quarterbacks, sometimes they hit a certain age where they just stop playing well. And I think that the only thing that's going to stop the Chargers from being a very, very competitive team this year and going deep into the playoffs could be if Phillip Rivers either suffers injury because of his age or starts to suffer game play because of his age. I don't think Tyrod Taylor would come in and do the job that he does with the pieces that are around him. With that said, it is a very solid team, both defense and offensively, well-rounded, well-coached. Again, one of the only teams I think maybe better than the Colts, although maybe the Colts improved enough to get past them. We'll have to see how that goes. That's a question mark all by itself. But to focus on the Chargers, I do think that they are still in that position where to me, the Patriots are the only team that are better than them in the AFC. This is the second best team in the AFC. I think the Colts are the third best in the AFC. So, Chargers fans, you got nothing to worry about, at least on paper, right at this second. You guys do seem like you're going to be heading into the year next year in a great position. As always, like I said, they have been very competitive since Phillip Rivers got there. He did have a few years where I don't know if it was injury or his head wasn't in the game or what. He did drop his play, but he seems to have picked it up again. I think it comes from how many babies that he has. I think when you look at it, how you got to keep playing, and you got to keep playing at your age and making more money, because I think he's got like 25 or 26 kids. That's not a real number, but something like that. He is, like I said, underrated. Great player. It would be interesting to see how the year plays out next year. Again, I think the Chargers and the Patriots are our two biggest competitions in the AFC. I would have thrown the Chiefs in there had they not lost so many people. So this division is going to be very interesting to watch. It's going to be a fun year next year. I think the AFC looks stacked. I think it's going to be great. A lot of these question marks are going to be answered next year. Will the Raiders be better? Will they be about the same? Will all of their additions blow up in their face, or will they benefit them? Will Joe Flacco be able to elevate the Broncos' play past the Chiefs, who have lost so many people? Will Patrick Mahomes be able to overcome some of those losses and win? And will Phillip Rivers still play at a high level? It's going to be a fun year next year. Thank you for joining me and tuning in and watching my video. If you like what you heard, give me a like, give me a subscribe. Here at 420 Colts Lane, we always take the high road. So, with that said, thank you for watching, and you guys have a great day.